Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph will begin Daf Tes Vav Amud Beis, 10 lines from the bottom. Ihachi. We learned previously that according to Rav Yochanan, when Rameir says Medivreim, from their words, you can learn out that you burn on Erev Pesach the Truma Tahera with the Truma Tameya, that you can burn it together. It means we're learning out from the words of Medivreim of Chanina Sakana Kahanim. And the limit is as follows. We see that you can burn the Tomei Kachim together with the Torah, that meaning that the Tomei Kachim, which is Tomei Derais, we can burn it with Kachim, which Miderais is Torah, but Tomei Midarabonon. So Rameir concludes, therefore, you can burn a Chametz, which is Torah, the Truma Tahara with the Truma Tameya, even on the 6th hour. Now, even though this is Tomei and Tohar, where in the case of the Kachim of Chanin's Kanakanim, it's Tomei Deraisa with Tomei Derabanan, but nevertheless, he draws an analogy between Isser and Tumah. Just like over there, something which is Torah Midaraisa, you can bring with something which is Tomei Deraisa, because the Torah Midaraisa is still Tomei Midarabanan, and therefore you have no mitzvah shimur on it because it's going to be burned, and it's Tomei Midarabanan. Similarly, on the 6th hour, you can burn the two together because the chometz, which is Torah, the Truma Tahara, is also Midarabanan, and we equate the Isser with the Tumah. That's what Rameir says. Rav Yossi says, Ein min amida. He says you can't compare it. You can't compare it because over there it's a Tumah, which is it's Tomei and Tohar, and here it's over here by Erev Pesach it's Tomei and Tohar, whereas by Kachim it's Tomei and Tomei. However, he said that on the 7th hour, which is Aser, the Chometz is also Midaraisa, there everyone is Maida, Rav Yossi is also Maida, you can burn the two together. Well, if that's the case, and you're saying that Rameir is learning out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim, so what is it that the Mishnah says, that Rav Yossi says, Ein min amida? No, you can't derive it from there, you can't learn out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim, but Maida, Rabbi Lezer and Rav Shua are Maida, that they're Maida, that you can burn the burn separately. What does it have to do? What does it negaya? What's the shaykhas between a Rabbi Lezer and Yeshua to Rav Chanina Sakana Kahanim? The more answers, Halchi Kamalei Rav Yossi Rameir. This is what Rav Yossi is saying to Rameir. I feel Rav Yeshua the Maker, meaning you can't draw an analogy, and you can't say that you can burn together Truma Tameya with the heart. Rav Chanina Sakana Kahanim was talking about Tameya with Tameya. And even the shita that we find that Ramekel, the Rav Yeshua is Mekel, and he says that you can be Matama, that you can be Matama things, Ki Mekel, whereas he Mekel, but Luyutme. He said that's only a suffix. If you have a suffix, so there, since it's going to be destroyed, you can't use it, there's no din of Shimur, that's a Tluya Utmeya, so you can do it with a Tluya with the Tmeya. You can burn the suffix Truma Tameya with the Truma which is Vadai Tame. But something which is Vadai Tor, you can't burn it with something which is Tame. So even the one who's Mekel, Rav Yeshua, doesn't go so far as to say that you can burn together Tahara Tameya. So how can you learn out? And how can you learn out from Chanina Sakana Kahanim that you can burn on Erev Pesach Truma, which is Tahira with Tameya? Even Rav Yeshua, who is the Mekel, so he said that you can be Matama. Yes, it's when it's a Vadai, when it's a Tahira, you can be Matama. Yeah, that's in a case where it's a Hefsim Ruba, like the case of the gas, where it's going to now be ruined, it's going to ruin the Chulin. In a case of Hefsim Ruba, he was Mekel. In a case where it's not a Hefsim Ruba, like in the case of you have the barrel, which was a Tluya, it's only with a Tluya that you can be Mekel, with a suffix, but not with a Harav. So that is how he learns the shot. That was Rav Yossi's time. If that's the case, well, if that's the case, why does Rav Yossi say you can't learn it out? You should be able to learn it out. Because the basic point of what Rameir is saying is that you can compare the case of Chanina Sakana Kahanim to our case by burning an Erev Pesach. Why is that? Over there, it's a case where it's Tomei and Tomei. Tomei Deraisa, Kachim, which are Tomei Deraisa, burning it with Kachim, which are Tomei Derabanan. Rameir equates it to our case in Erev Pesach, where it's not Tomei it's not Tomei and Tomei, it's Tomei and Tar, but it's Tomei and also Midrabanan. He's equating the case of Kachim, which are Tomei and Tomei, Deraisa and Derabanan, to a case of Chametz Erev Pesach, which is Tomei, which is Tohar, but it's also midrabanan in the 6th hour, it's also bahana. And he's equating the two, and just like by the kachim you can burn it, here also you can burn it, because since it's also, there's no mitzvah shimur on it. You don't have to protect it from becoming tomei. Now that basic comparison, according to the way Rav Yochanan is learning, Rav Yossi agrees to that, because he says that on the 7th hour, where the Isser is a Deraisa, there he's moida, you can burn it together. So there, he does equate Isser with Tumah. And he says, on the 7th hour, where you have a Tomei and a Tohar, but since the Tohar is Aser min HaTorah, there's no mitzvah shima, you can burn it. So he does make that equation. He does equate the two. Well, if he equates the two, then you should equate it, you should agree to Rameir, because the case of Ruchanias Kana Kahanim is Tomei Deraisa with Tomei Derabanan. Well, if you're equating Tuma with Isser, well, that case is Tomei Deraisa with Tomei Derabanan. So you should equate it to burning it on the 6th hour, which is Tomei Deraisa with Isser Derabanan. So you should make that equation. You should equate the two, and you should allow it in the 6th hour. Rav Yomi says, what we're talking about over here in the case of Ruchanias Kana Kahanim is we're talking about the meat of kachim was nitma with a liquid, which was nitma with a sheretz. And really the basis of the machlekes of Rameir and Rav Yossi is this case a case of Tumah Deraisa or Tumah Derabanan? That's the very point. That's the point in question. According to Rabbi Yossi, he says you can't learn it out from Ruchanias Kana Kahanim, because that case was Tumah Deraisa with Tumah Deraisa. A higher level of Tumah Deraisa with a lower level, but they were both Tumah Deraisa. Yes, Rabbi Yossi says you can equate Tumah with Yisur, but you have to equate it on the same level, Deraisa with the Deraisa. The case of Ruchanias Kana Kahanim was Tumah Deraisa and Tumah Deraisa. Higher level and lower level, but both Deraisa. You can't learn out that you can burn chametz in the 6th hour, which is Isser Derabanan, but in the 7th hour, which is Isser Deraisa, yes, you can equate it. But Rameir says no. The case of Ruchanias Kana Kahanim was a case of not Deraisa and Deraisa, it was Deraisa and Derabanan, and therefore you can learn out to the 6th hour, which is Tumah Deraisa with Isser Derabanan. What's the basis of the machlekes? The case is, they're not arguing what the case is, they're arguing what the halacha in the case was. It was, you had basar, kachim, that was nitma b'avatuma. So that kachim, that was a rishon l'tuma. Then the other piece of meat was with basar shenitma b'mashkim shenitma machma sheretz. There was a sheretz that was metame mashkim, liquids. Now, it was matama the liquid, and now the liquid became tomei. So, and the liquid was now matama the basar. Is that tuma to the basar, is that a tuma deraisa or tuma derabanan? And that really is the point of the machlekes. That's what the machlekes revolves around. So the case of the basar that's a nitma of vlada tuma, and the case of Ruchanias Kana Kahanim is not that it was nitma in a regular vlada tuma, but it was nitma b'mashkin shenitma machmas sheretz. It was liquid that became tamei machmas sheretz. And the point is, and the issue is, does the liquid as a mashka, does it convey tuma to something else midaraisa? Va'az the Rabbi Meir letamei, Rabbi Yossi letamei, and both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi follow their own sheets, their own reasoning. Rabbi Meir letamei, damer tumas mashkim letamachim derabbanan. Rabbi Meir says that mashkim that became tamei liquids, to convey tuma to something else is midrabanan. It can convey it midrabanan, it can be matama something else midrabanan, but not deraisa. And Rav Yossi letamei damar tumas mashkin letamar chem daraisa. But he says no, it can be matama something else minatayr. So that's what the machlekes revolves around. According to Rav Meir, the case of Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim was you had tuma kachim that bosashin ba'avat tuma, which was a rishon daraisa. They burned it together with something that was nitma, with a vlada tuma through mashkin, which is a darabona. So you see that even though on a deraisa level it's a tomei Torah, but midrabanan it's tomei, you can burn it together. And we equate tuma with isur, and therefore on the 6th hour, which is also midrabanan, even though it's only midrabanan, you can burn it together. Rav Yossi says no. The case of Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim was basar shenitma avat tuma rishon deraisa with something that was nitma bevlada tuma with mashkin, and mashkin could convey tuma to something else midaraisa. So therefore, this meat of kachim that became tamei through the mashkin, which became tamei from the sheretz, is tamei de'araisa. So you can't learn out that you can burn on the 6th hour, which is iser, with the rabbanon, with tuma de'araisa. Even though it's true, according to this pshat, even though it's true that Rav Yossi agrees you could equate iser with tuma, but you can only learn out that from Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim that if they're both tamei de'araisa. So by the 7th hour, where it's Isur D'Oraisa, you can burn it with Tumah D'Oraisa. But on the 6th hour, which is the Rabbanon, you can't learn out, because the case of Rav Chanina Skana Kahanim was a case of Tumah D'Oraisa. So it's a basic machlokes, can mashkin convey Tumah D'Oraisa or the Rabbanon, as we'll see shortly in the following brisa the Gemara brings down. Rashi points out that when we say that it was the liquids that were nitma with the sheretz, became tummy with the sheretz, that, and now the basar came into contact with the liquid, Rashi says it's not quite meduyak, because if that would be the case, then, well, the sheretz is an av, the liquid would become a rishon, and the meat would become a sheni. So you're burning it with the meat that's a rishon, it makes it into a sheni. It's already a sheni. You're not being meisif any tuma. Al karch, we must say that the sheretz came into contact with the kli. The kli came into contact, so the kli is a rishon. The kli came into contact with the liquid, which is a sheni. It touched the meat, which is a shlishi. It's a shlishi, and now by burning it with the basar shenit ba'avat tuma, which is a rishon, you're making the shlishi into a sheni. Rashi further points out that we must say that the meat that is matama oichlam or matama oichlam in kachim is a deraisa, because otherwise if it's not a deraisa, then you wouldn't be able to learn out that you're making a shlishi into a sheni deraisa. So we must learn that the oichlam or matama oichlam in kachim is a deraisa. Where do we see this machlokes that where mashkim can convey tuma, convey tuma midaraisa or midarabana? The son you learn to the braysa safek mashkin letam in a case where you have a mashkin which are safek, which they became tomei. So it's a safek mashkin if they became tomei. So out of safek, if it's a safek, we have to treat it as tuma. Rashi says in Rishus Yachid, we're talking, it's a Rishus Yachid, Savik Tumah Rishus Yachid. Letame acherim, but whether it can be matame acherim, others, tor. This is tor, div Rameir. That's what Rameir says. Rameir says that midaraisa, it's tor. It cannot be matame midaraisa. So this is the shita of Rameir, which we just mentioned. So that's the Rameir. Rabbi Elazar, he agreed with Rameir. Rabbi Yehuda lakol tomei. He says, and as far as anything is concerned, it's if it's anything that is safek, if the tomei, something which was tomei touched, it's out of safek, it's tomei. We say that since midaraisa, mashkim could be matama. So he argues on Rameir. He says midaraisa could be matama. So as far as everything is concerned, and we're not machalek, we say that safek is tomei. Rabbi Yosef, Rav Shimon, Aimrim, they say la'oichlim t'meim l'kelim t'ahirim, but they make a chilik. They say that as far as oichlim, it can convey tuma d'oraisa, but not kelim. they make a difference between kalim and not. So the point of the machlekes, what it revolves around, the Torah says l'gabe a kli sheretz that fell into a l'gabe a sheretz rather that fell into a kli cheres. The Torah says mikol oichal asher yachal asher yavel of ma'im yitma b'chol mashka asher yishasa b'chol kli yitma. So it says kol mashka asher yishasa, any liquid yitma. So it's a yitma, so that implies that it itself becomes tameh. But not, it doesn't say yitameh. So that implies that it is tameh, but it cannot convey tumat to others. And that's how Reb Meir learns that minat Torah, the mashkim which are tameh, cannot transmit the tumat to others. But the others learn it that yitma, but they darshan it yitameh. They say that we darshan it as yitameh, that it could be matama others. Then what is the machlokes? Is it regarding everything or legabe kalim? Now, they say that it says yikatameh, but it says the words kli. It says over there in the pasuk, "B'chol mashka sheishasa b'chol kli yitameh." So therefore, he learns, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says, it means that it can even be matama kalim. But Rav Yossi and Rav Shimon say that no, that it's only referring to other two foods. It's not referring to kalim, and they say you don't darshan this connection between where it says that yitameh kol bechol kli. They don't connect the two together, and they're machalik between oichlim and between kalim. However, we see this machlekes over here that Rav Yossi says that it could be matama oichlim minatayra, and Rav Meir says it's not matama minatayra, and that's a fundamental issue whether the case of Rav Chanina Sagana Gahanim was Tuma and Tuma Daraisa, or Tuma and Tuma Darabanan. Frag the Gemara, V'savar Rabbi Elazar, Mashkin Yisrael Tuma Boilum. The Gemara asks, does Rabbi Elazar hold there is any Tuma for Mashkim at all? Now in the Brisa we said that Rav Meir held that for liquids they have their own Tuma, but they can't transmit Tuma to others. And it says that V'chein Hoya Rabbi Elazar Emekidvara, that he agreed with that. Is it so that Rabbi Elazar holds that mashkim even have their own tumah? Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Elazar Aimer ein tumah lamashkim kol iker. He says there is no tumah for liquids at all. Teda sharehed Yosef ben Yoezer ish treda. He was made al ayl kamsa dochen. So one aegis that he gave is not related to our case. That a certain type of grasshopper is kosher, is a min of chagovim that are kosher. That's one edus, and then he's also made of al mashkin based midbechaya dochen, and he's also made on the liquids in the base midbechaya, the butchering place in the base of mikdash, that the liquids are tohar. Now, the rabbanon were meikal, and they wouldn't go in the base of mikdash, but only on something which is a rabbanon. If there is something which is also midrabanan, they were meikal in the base of mikdash, not to be matama. But if something is a deraisa, they couldn't be meikal. Now, the fact that it says that it's tor, doesn't that show you that the whole tumah for mashkim is not a deraisa? The deraisa, they don't even have their own tumah. It's only midrabanan, and that's why they were not geyser in the base of mikdash. Then that's fine according to Shmuel. When he says tohar, what is meant by tohar is that it's not matam others. Aval tumas atzman yesh lahem, but they have their own tumah shakir. Then it fits well, because that's a shita of Rav Meir, and Rabbi Elazar held that way as well. But El Rav the Oma Dohan Mamish, he says that no, it's Tor Mamish, even its own tumah, it doesn't have Ma'ika L'meima. So you see, therefore, that Rabbi Elazar holds that there's no tumah for mashkim at Kol Iker, even their own tumah to be the Kimibakawal tumah for themselves, not only to transmit themselves on the rice, it's Tohor. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, he says, therefore we must say, when we says Rabbi Elazar Mikidvorim, he agreed to Rav Meir, it doesn't mean in Ganson, it doesn't mean he totally agrees with him. It means only in one of the halachas. As far as transmitting tumas to others, it does not transmit. But he doesn't argue on tumas asman. Rav Meir says that it has tumas asman, Rabbi Elazar says it doesn't. Kidvarov ko Amar, he says that Kidvarov, which is Rabin, the plural, than Fishi, which means both. He says the same. Similarly, he says what the same thing Rav Meir says. kasha. And Chanami, according to Rav, this would be a kasha. Gufa Rav Dochin Mamish. He says when it says tor, it means tor mamish. It means it doesn't even have its own tum. Shmuel said it's only as far as being metam others. Aval tumas atzman yeshlam, but it does have its own tum. Rav Amar Dochin Mamish, he says it's completely tor kasava tumas mashkim de Rabbana. He held that tumas mashkin, that Yesi ben Erezer holds that a mashke is not mekabel tuma midarais at all. It's only midarabbanan. V'chi goes the rabbanan whether we're goyzer b'mashkin dalma, and only in mashkin of other places. But mashkin beis b'chaya loy gozer. But in the base of Mikdash they weren't goyzer. U'shmuel amad acham l'tam tum sacher. But Shmuel says no. That they weren't goyzer is only on transmitting tuma to others. Aval tumas atzman yeshlam, but it has its own tuma. Kasava, he held that, according to Shmuel, Reis ben Yezer held, Tumas Mashkin Asam Darais. It's the rice, so therefore, even in the Beis HaMikdash, it's also Tame. L'tame acherim derabbanan, but as far as being metama others, that's the Rabbanan. V'chi goes the Rabbanan, where were they guys that are being metama others? That's been Mashkin Dalma. That's only in Mashkin Dalma. But as far as Mashkin basement dechaya loy gozer, but on the basement dechaya loy gozer. Vechi loy gozer rabbanon l'tmui acher, aval tumas asman yesh lahem. And where were they geyser? They were not geyser in the Beis HaMikdash. That's to be metama others, because that's the rabbanon. But tumas asman, which is the deraisa, on that they were geyser. On that they were geyser. So, according to Rav, he held there's no tumah whatsoever midaraisa, and according to Shmuel, he held no, the tumah asman it has, but tumah derabanan it doesn't have tumah derabanan, and therefore we must say that when it says in the brisa that it says Rabbi Lazar Oimer ain't tumah lamashkim kol iker, there's no tumah for mashkim whatsoever, they have no tumah at all. So according to Shmuel, when he says there's no tumah at all, now he says there is tumah. He says it has tumah asman. So when he says that there's no tumah at all, it means there's no tumah to be matama other things at all, whether it's eichlim or whether it's kalim. That's what it means. That not that there's no tumah whatsoever. Shmuel will learn. Zok Taisus, not that there's no tumah. It has tumah asman, but there's no tumah to be matama others, whether it's eichlim or kalim. When you go up to Rapapa, Ramile asked the following kasha, Mi Amar Shmuel, Dachen Milatama Tumasacher. He said it's only Torah from being Matama others. Aval Tumas Asman Yesh Lahem, but it has its own Tumah. How could you say that? Korikan, the Pasuk says, Va Basar Asher Yiga B'chol Tome Lo Yeyochel. It says any of the meat of kachim that comes into contact with anything that's Tome can't be eaten. Now, even if you're going to say, therefore, that mashkim will not be matama, other things, midaraisa will not be matama, but you have to say that's only by chulin. That's only by chulin, but by kachim, where the pasuk says va'basar, the basar of kachim, asher yiga b'chol tomei, touches anything, comes into contact with anything which is tomei, it itself cannot be eaten. So therefore, if you're telling me that the mashkim have their own tumah, it's called tomei. Well, if the balls of kachim touch it, they should also become tomei. Lo yeyochel. So therefore, in the case in the Beis HaMikdash, it should be transmitting tumah to the kachim. Amar Rav Shisha Breder Vidi Midid Ava Ravi B'Kaidish. He says it's not a kasha because we know that by kachim it goes to Ravi. Now, it goes to a level of Ravi, but if the Ravi touches something else, it's not matamet. It doesn't transmit the tumah. So you see about kachim that even though it says that it comes into contact with something tumah, which is lo ya'echal, but l'cher we must say that it's only up to a certain level because we see there's a Ravi by Kaddish. It itself cannot be eaten, but if it comes into contact with another basar, other basar of kachim, then it does not transmit the tumah. It doesn't. There's no chamishi by kachim. So here also the same thing. Maskiv Ravashi, what do you mean? Ravi Bekodesh Likra Tomi. The Ravi is not called Tomi. The Torah never called a Ravi, it never identified something in Kodshim as Tomi as Ravi. We only learn out that there is a Ravi by Kodshim from Kal V'Chomer. The Torah doesn't call it Tomi. So we learn out that it itself is a Ravi, it itself becomes possible. It's not called Tomi. It's called Ravi B'Kodesh Le'ikra Tomi. It's not called Tomi. We learn out that it is possible, that it itself accepts the Tumah, is now considered Tomi, and it can't be eaten, but the Torah never calls it Tomi. It can't transmit the Tumah to others. But Hai Ikra Tomi. But over here, this is called Tomi. So if you're saying that the mashkim is that it's called Tomi, that it has Tumas Atzman, that means that it's called Tomi. That the Torah called it, that it says that there's any mashkim, that it says that the whole mashka asher yishasa b'chol kli yitma, that refers to the having Tomei, that the liquid is coming into contact with something. B'chol, it says b'chol mashka asher yishasa b'chol kli yitma. The Torah called it Tomei. Well, if the Torah called it Tomei, then you have to apply what the pasuk says, that any kachim that comes into contact with Tomei, that so you can't eat it. Kasha, it's like a kasha. Tashma. Let's bring a raya from the following brisa, and l'cher this be a kasha and Rav. Tashma v'chol mashka asher yishasa v'chol kli yitma. The pasuk says, Mikol ha'echel asher yachal sheyavel mayim. It says if there's any food item that comes into contact with the liquid, meaning it has a hechsher, it's hochshel kabel tuma. So it says asher yav mayim yitma, v'chol mashka asher yishasa v'chol kli yitma, and it says that any liquid that's in a kli, it says yitma. So it says v'chol mashka yishasa v'chol kli yitma. Doesn't that show you that a liquid has its tumas atzma, that it has its own tuma? Well, it says no, ma yitma hechsher. It doesn't mean it's Tomei, it means Hechsher. It means that it's Hochsher. It can be Machsher, that it's Hochsher, that if food touches any type of liquid, then it's a Hochsher L'Kabel Tumah. The food becomes Hochsher L'Kabel Tumah. Well, we know that from the ratio of the pasuk, from the beginning of the pasuk. It says, we know that if a food comes into contact with water, it becomes Hochshel Kabel Tumah. So I wouldn't need this part of the pasuk to tell me Hechsher. Now, as the Rashash explains, yes, it's true, but we need the Sefer of the pasuk to say not only that water is Machsher, but B'chol Mashka Sher Yishasa. What do you mean the ratio of the crow? Yes, the ratio of the crow, we know that water is machshir, but the point over here is that other liquids are also machshir of food to mikabel tuma. But he explains that, but you wouldn't have to say yitma. It doesn't have to say yitma. You could just say v'chol mashka sher yishalsa, v'chol kli. It doesn't have to say yitma. So therefore, the Gemara's kash is hechsher meresh the gosh shamadle mikol oicha sher yachal. So Gemara says, no, it's talking about hechsher, and I need both for hechsher. Chad betlushim, one is where it's detached from the ground, where you took it from a spring or from a mayan, from a yam, from a collecting on the ground, and you put it in a kli. It's tolish. And one when it's still connected to the ground. It's rich, and I need both. The ashmina is solution. If you only told me betolush, I would think mishum dakshavina. The fact that he drew the water into the kli, gave it a chashivas, you'd think that type of water is maksher, the kabel tuma. And mishum dakshavina, it's mechuborim, that's still attached to the ground, so you didn't give it a special chashiva, same alloy. I might think that it's not machir. It says because since it's in its place, it still has chashivas, it's in its source. It's where the source of the water is. About tlushim, where it's not connected to the source, aim alloy. That's why I need it in both cases. So I need both to tell me that it's machshir. The Maram Chalva explains, according to Shmuel, however, he will not learn that you need it for both. he says that I don't need a strichasa, and therefore you can learn out. You don't need it for hechsher, you can learn it out for tumah. Tashma ach mayin vor mikveh mayim yator. It says a mayan. It says a spring or a mikveh is tor. The water will be tor. So doesn't that show you that the water that's connected to the ground is tor? It's not mekabel tumah. But water that's not connected to the ground is mekabel tumah. Doesn't that show you that tumas asman yesh lehem? In other words, it says no. Mayator mitumasa. It's not referring to the tumah of the liquid. It means Torah means if a person is toivel in a mayin, a mikveh mayim, in a mayin or a mikveh, the person will become Torah. Right? But it's not referring to the tumah of the liquid of the water itself.